We will be starting soonish.
Thank you, Devin.
So the last few joiners coming in.
Right. Well, I propose we get started. Welcome, everybody, to this September Crypto Monday. We're pleased that so many of you are still joining us. This must be our, I don't know, I've lost count of how many virtual meetings we've had. But one of the things I was going to say to people, we've been talking about it, we would really like to get back to face-to-face meetings, and our target right now is the November meeting. That will be in London somewhere. We are still working on a venue. So I'm going to throw it out there. If anybody's aware of a venue that might be suitable for a meeting of anywhere from 30-ish up to 80 or 90 people, where we would have access to a place people could sit, listen to a speaker, mingle, network, and where we could be able to comfortably serve drinks and nibbles. So any thoughts? You've got our contact details. Let any one of us know, Caitlin, Oleg, Devin, or myself. We'd appreciate it. So without further ado, as they say, I'd like to introduce Brigitte Small. Brigitte has stepped in at the last minute because her colleague was unable suddenly to join us. And I'm really fascinated by the title of Brigitte's talk tonight. So I think it's something I'm certainly looking forward to. Brigitte works with Queensbridge Associates, predominantly in the area of sustainability and as a consultant. She has a background in both the insurance and the banking sector. So it comes with a lot of different real world experience, and will be interesting to see what she has to say this evening. So I'm going to turn it over to Oleg.
Thank you, Larry. Just before we hand the talk to Brigitte, just 2 words about the structure. So if you have any questions, please write them in the chat. I'm going to take a note, and then at the end of the talk, I will be reading out the questions. Depending on how big is the audience, maybe I'll just ask you to repeat your question directly. So during the talk, just keep writing down your questions. And with that, please, Brigitte, if I could hand the word over to you.
Thanks so much, Oleg and Larry. Yeah, excited to be here. I'm just gonna find my presentation. Here we go. Okay. Right. Here we go. So, yeah, so the question, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, obviously, but I think potentially a legitimate question is, can crypto save the world? And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about big existential threats, which are often talked about as sustainability. Sustainability is a very broad term, and I've kind of mostly focused this around climate change. So sorry to anybody who works in the sustainability space who might feel that it's a little bit reductive. But I guess if we think about the challenges that we face as humanity, climate change is the big one, and it's very linked to a lot of the other challenges that we face as a planet and as humanity. So if we can crack that one, we're on pretty good track for a lot of the other challenges that we have. So a little bit about I'm going to talk a little bit about the problem, not too much. And then we're going to go into some of the solutions that might be coming out of the crypto world. So very simply, we all know this, climate change is here. It's not a future hypothetical situation. The kind of latest report has come out around looking at the state of the world and from the IPCC, and the Secretary General of the United Nations has said this is a code red for humanity. So it's very, very clear the cyclones and the extreme weather events that we're seeing on a regular basis now will continue. And depending on what we do as people, how we respond to that, they will get worse to a greater or lesser degree. Oh, I think my presentation has stopped. Okay, let me see. Okay. So I've put this graph in. It's from the from Climate Action Tracker, and really just kind of at a very high level for people who aren't from sustainability. So the black line that we're seeing on the left is the historical carbon emissions, and that is the primary cause of climate change. And that's what has been happening historically. So if you think about, say, the organization in which you work, or having a CEO talking about this is the trend on some bad thing that's happening within our organization, and it's just kind of been creeping up over the last 20 or more years, as we can see on the graph. However, if we continue to do this, it's going to cause an enormous problem. So we need to change it very significantly. And really, when we talk about that, we're really talking about this kind of green line on the bottom. That's the one that, in some sense, kind of contains climate change. If we go beyond that, we go into a realm that we don't understand in terms of the types of catastrophes that we're dealing with. And that might be from floods that we're already seeing at a much more extreme level, crop failures, hunger, people migration. It's a very kind of disastrous scenario. So 1.5 is the one that is very highly recommended by scientists. And we would need, therefore, as a planet, to change our behavior so much that we reduce our carbon emissions along this green line. So just to keep it really simple, we're talking about between now and 2030, a reduction of 50% of our carbon emissions. Sorry about this quite horrible graph, but I thought it was just worth talking about COVID and the whole experience that we've had, because we have had this very dramatic change in the way in which we live over the last year, 18 months. And that has proven one thing to us: we are able to change very dramatically. And we've, in a sense, had a practice run of what it's like to change the way in which we do things in a very extreme way. And so this is actually the carbon emissions graph from the COVID period. So looking at how carbon emissions have changed. And you can see that they kind of drop very dramatically on this red piece. And actually, if you look at the data overall for 2020 over 2019, there was a drop in 7% overall of carbon emissions. So 7% for a global pandemic, which affected all of us. We suddenly worked from home, we weren't flying anymore. Our lives changed in a very dramatic way. And we need to do many times more of that. So by 2030. So that just gives us a kind of sense on a kind of human level, a tangible level of the extreme level of change that we will all need to be experiencing and perhaps even creating in order to avert catastrophic climate change. So this is the kind of summary from a piece by from the Exponential Roadmap, which is looking at how could we reduce emissions by 50%, what would be required. And there's some really exciting stuff happening, especially around energy generation, a lot of technologies like wind that have become highly viable from an economic standpoint, and all kinds of other innovations that get talked about a lot. The electrification of the transport system, etc., is all really, really exciting. But as it says here, the digital technology still remains a wild card. So the industry that many of us will belong to is experiencing very rapid transformation, very high levels of innovation, and is potentially either part of the problem or a very large part of the solution. And I think that's where this is really kind of exciting, is that I'm bringing, the next session is going to be talking about a whole bunch of potential solutions that either individually or even collectively could provide some very powerful solutions to this challenge that we all face. So I put this in, it's a little bit cheeky, but I think there's so much analysis that goes on in terms of how we are actually going to address the sustainability challenge. And the reality is that we have to make it happen. And that's often very different from the theory. So there's an element of miracle there.
Sorry,
yes.
Do you mind to reshare your screen? It stopped sharing.
Oh,
just
sure.
In this moment.
Can you see
it? Yes, we can. Thanks.
Right. So. Okay, super. So here are 4 elements of miracles from the metaverse and beyond. If we need a miracle, here are some pieces that might take us in that direction. So one is efficiency and decarbonisation. Obviously, there's lots of talk around the amount of energy that Bitcoin uses, what type of energy it's using. And I'm going to talk about a couple of exciting things, although there are many, many points that could be talked about there. I think these are 2 examples that are interesting to talk about. We'll talk about community-owned assets and regenerative money. And then we're going to talk about how organizations are put together and the role that DAOs might take in that, in fostering really high levels of innovation and change on the social level. So on the innovation point, I wanted to share Telos with you. I saw that Simon is on the call and maybe some other people from our little crypto group. We talked about Telos quite a lot. And as you can see, here is the currency on the left. It has a very, very low power usage per transaction, and it actually kind of offers free transactions on the chain. And it's offered as a kind of community benefit platform. And so there are many, many innovations happening in terms of how we can deliver blockchain technology much more efficiently. This is CT. It's a company that has recently been founded by Acre. Acre is a energy infrastructure provider. It's very strongly in the sustainability space. And they have now entered with what will be a blockchain mining business that will use renewable energy and invest in the ecosystem to improve it and also to foster sustainability goals. By the way, I noticed that the CEO also said, so they're very keen to invest in businesses, and they're talking about the bigger the dream, the more we want to listen. So if anybody is putting together a project and needs funding, then potentially CT is an interesting party to talk to. So community-owned assets. This is a really interesting area. If we look at financial governance, a lot of the problems relate to the centralization and the kind of separation really of incentives between the owners of assets and the beneficiaries. So if we can align those 2 parties more closely, can we deliver better on the needs of community through that? So one example of that is Helium. So they're building a telecoms network. So it's 5G in the US, and you can buy a device and you can mine HNT, and it will all of these devices will network together, and they are there to serve basically the IoT technology. So for instance, Lime scooters are able to access this in order to locate where the scooters are. And this is an image. So I did a presentation on Helium back in April, and there were 30,000 hotspots. And right now, as you can see, there's 185,000 of them. And this is just the map of Europe, where you can see the density and coverage of that. And this is as they call themselves, the People's Network. This really is a kind of democratically owned infrastructure network. So really interesting model to see how that pans out. And this is Tree DeFi. So they're planting trees, they're printing creating NFTs for trees, and you can receive CO2 tokens as a reward for the trees that you own. So they're kind of creating an economy for our natural capital, if you like. Yeah, there are new types of communities being created, so regenerative money. I want to try to play a video now, which you can just bear with me to do that. That would be right here. So I think I have to.
Brigitte, I don't think we can hear you. Your sound disappeared.
I think it's because she's playing a video.
Okay.
But the video hasn't started, I think.
While most of us dream of recreating a cleaner, greener, and more beautiful world, the financial system has very different priorities. It relies on infinite exploitation to feed a dream of endless growth. In reality, though, our lives depend on one planet with finite resources. And with that planet in the midst of a climate crisis, this disconnect between our financial system and our ecosystem is one we can no longer afford. Seeds offers a solution, a movement that allows us to share financial success, distribute value fairly, and move towards the common vision of a thriving civilization. Seeds gives humanity the tools to reimagine what money can be and do. A financial ecosystem designed to regenerate our planet. Seeds, all uppercase, is the ecosystem's name, and Seeds, capital S, is its currency. One that's already rewarding the people and organizations, creating a healthier, more equal, and a world. Seeds uses cutting-edge technology aimed at creating a more healthy and stable economy, and there are no fees for using it. In fact, the more you exchange, the more value you help create. Value that Seeds reinvests in the planet via grants to community projects, regenerative businesses, and movements. Better still, as the value of Seeds grows, it flows to all members of the Seeds ecosystem, not based on wealth, but on how much they contribute to healing the planet and shaping Seeds itself. That's right, Seeds is a true democracy that lets us all own the change we want to see in the world. Finally, a financial system by the people, for the people, to regenerate our planet. Yes.
Brigitte, can you hear us? We can't hear you.
I'm going to send her a message.
Brigitte, maybe stop sharing the screen and then hopefully the sound will switch. Brigitte, we still can't hear you. Do you mind to rejoin? Sorry, everyone. Some technical issues.
She's gone. Hopefully she'll rejoin.
I just let her in.
Hello. Sorry, guys. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Great, it's all working again. So did you have audio on the video?
Yes, we had audio on the video.
Oh, amazing.
Sorry, audio on the video, yes.
Okay. Great. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to the presentation then. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about how we organize as humans, because obviously, even if we're working with technology, you know, the innovation happens in the way that we collaborate in our brains and who we are as people. So I wanted to talk a bit about that. This is a little bit of it's slightly exaggerated and humorous diagram, but I think all of us probably recognize organizations in which we've worked that are like this. And it really talks about a lot of the politics and all the kind of environment, all the things that can make working more complicated than it needs to be sometimes. And also, if you look at kind of the smiley faces, the people at the top are very smiley and the people at the bottom are very sad. So you know, there's also an element of power structure that's inherent in traditional organizations, and that there's quite a lot of management thinking around how to solve that. If you follow teal organizations at all, that's a kind of big school of thought around improving engagement and having people bring their whole selves to work, which again, if we think about innovation, we really want to be heart and soul in what we're doing, not just kind of going through the motions. I love Buckminster Fuller. If you don't know him and you're interested in doing things differently, he's a really great, or he was a really great thinker. You know, he talks about you have to create a new model, a new reality, show people how to do things differently. And to an extent, I think that's what's happening within DAOs, and certainly what will happen a lot more over the next few years. And it's a really exciting space in that regard. So just thinking about kind of innovation organization, if that's the imperative, we need to find ways to be the most creative we possibly can to come up with solutions. We already know that very centralized inward-looking innovation is limited in its efficacy. And a lot of the thinking over the last few years has been about going more towards open innovation and then more to this kind of ecosystem approach where anybody can work with anybody. And for all of us in the blockchain world, that's obviously going to sound very familiar. So here is a diagram of DAOs. So on the left, you've got the kind of traditional organization, CEO at the top, and then various levels of management, and then the lowest kind of workers at the very bottom, this kind of pyramid structure. And what decentralized autonomous organizations allow us to do is to codify how we want to work together and to create relationships that we define for ourselves. So we can have distributed ownership, distributed decision-making, and because of the tools at our disposal, we can make that quite easy to effect. So if we want to say that everybody has a say in everything, which is not the way that many organizations go, but as a kind of extreme, that's possible. And to an extent, Switzerland kind of runs a lot of its decision making in that way. It's very highly involved, and so people are very interested in the outcomes of things. They're very interested in their communities, and that's what happens when you give people the power to decide, is that they take responsibility for the decision, they think about it, and the organization as a whole moves forward together. So I think this is a really exciting space, and I wanted to share another video and hope the technology will allow me to do that, of Aragon, which is a DAO software provider, if you like. They are enabling DAOs, yeah, I think I'll just share the video and let it speak for itself. Okay. Okay, so I'm again not hearing anything.
We can hear you so far.
You can, okay, great. So I've shared the audio from the webpage. So I'm going to play the video and hopefully you'll hear the audio. Brilliant.
So you asked me if there's going to be a revolution. I think there's already a revolution happening. We're seeing it everywhere.
Honestly, I feel like blockchain is almost slipping through the cracks. Threat yet. If you have a decentralized that starts performing services that the government used to provide, then what do you need these guys for? Bitcoin is the first real experiment. Never existed.
What's a DAO? I mean, decentralized autonomous organization is what it stands for, right?
Basically, a decentralized autonomous organization is an organization in which persistent.
We have evolved so much in society, but yet our governance structures are hundreds of years old.
Long period of monarchies, right? And that was a very centralized form of governance. And we had a great evolution with democracies, right? Spreading that power a bit more. Corporations are superseding nation states in terms of their power.
You're a digital serf right now. You work the land, you work the feed, and they take all the benefit. They take all of the value, right? It's a free service where you are the product.
Systems tend to perpetuate themselves. In other words, capitalism tends to do what's best.
Valley, they tend to fund projects or companies that are trying to solve very much first world problems. How do you get your food 5 minutes quicker? How do you get your Uber 2 minutes faster? Whereas with to fund initiatives that will produce true social good and provide value to the most undervalued parts of humanity.
This is the most egalitarian way to construct systems.
The culture is moving faster than the nation state can handle, right? We can have that same personal feeling that I have with my neighbor with the people in a chat room.
Traditional government institutions take a tremendously long time to fail, and when they do fail, there's usually violence, so we try not to let them fail.
But today, we are in the first time people getting killed because we can try those governance models from the comfort of our sofa.
You cannot threat an algorithm with a gun.
Because it's unstoppable. It's open source code. The cat's out of the bag right away when someone...
Brigitte, the connection is very poor. Do you mind to share the link in the group?
It's open source, you want to enhance it, you do it.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I will share that. Yeah, that's a shame. But anyway, it looks like we have a lot of questions and things, and I just wanted to leave everybody with that really, and then move on to maybe more of a discussion and a Q&A.
Perfect. So you're ready for Q&A, yeah?
Sorry?
You're ready for Q&A.
Ready for Q&A.
Fantastic. We had one question already that came in, which was about the one slide you were showing earlier. I've got a question about the slide comparing Telos with other cryptos. How do we know it isn't just the low number of transactions that is making it seem green?
Well, the overall energy usage is low because it's small, but then the energy usage per transaction should scale.
One question from me, just in case if you're familiar with some of projects like Eco, which I mean, obviously it's kind of tries to be very green friendly. So I don't know much about it, but I'm curious if you've heard of that.
Eco?
It's called Eco, ECO.
Okay, no, I haven't come across it. I would be really interested to know more about that.
Do we have any more questions in the meantime?
Brigitte, somebody made the comment that DAOs are full of power struggles and money talks.
Yeah, I love that comment. Yeah.
What's your thoughts on it?
Well, it's interesting. I guess I'm not surprised. I think people, you know, where there's incentives, there are politics and power. I think what's interesting, which the video kind of gets at, is the idea that with DAOs you can experiment with lots of different governance structures. So I guess my hope is that over the next few years, we're going to see lots of new types of structures that solve some of the recurring problems that we see.
One more question from Dejan. What do you like to see happening next in this space?
Oh, I guess more people getting into it, you know, adoption and yeah, just love to see it grow and blossom.
A question from Guy James. How did you get involved in the world of cryptos and DAOs?
Well, COVID was my gift for that. You know, I was for quite a long time, you know, somebody with a fintech background. It was something that I really felt I needed to immerse myself in. And combination of one of my clients having big financial difficulties because of COVID and COVID itself being at home a lot, I was looking for interesting stuff to learn. And yeah, so that's when I started this journey.
Brilliant. Any more questions? Anyone? I'm just thinking one question maybe from my side in terms of obviously, I mean, the video you shown was from Aragon, which is quite actually an interesting project I always thought. But do you see DAOs use something like Aragon to organize themselves, or do you think it will be more a question of each doing their own thing?
Sorry, what do you mean? Will Aragon?
I mean, Aragon as a platform, if I understand it correctly, they try to be like an operating system for DAOs.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't really followed too closely how successful this is a project. So I'm just curious if you think that DAOs will just kind of use a ready-made template from someone like Aragon for setting up their own structures, or if you think that people will just try to kind of do their own thing.
I think that having service providers that simplify making these types of structures means that there will be more of them. I mean, there's no reason, I mean, I guess you could have these types of structures in the past. What DAOs do is that they simplify that, and a platform like Aragon, in the video, this guy talks about the fact that within 30 minutes, he's kind of set up his organization with the governance structure and put the money in. So I guess Aragon won't be the only one, but I certainly think that's a layer of functionality that is going to help it evolve.
Thank you. And then we have a question from Pete. Do you see the evolution of Bitcoin and proof of work energy consumption as a cost for future innovation at the expense of the CO2 emissions worthwhile, or should the ethical investor not get involved and de-invest?
Ooh, there's a question that's going to have a lot of excited people on both sides. I mean, I think that if it's worth it, there's one argument to say that the infrastructure itself of Bitcoin and the potential that it has, this disintermediation potential to change the way the world works, will be worth it. And, perhaps that's true. And perhaps that's part of this argument that I'm making. And if that turns out to be true, then perhaps the cost will end up having been worth it. But we don't know, right? So, I mean, I know lots of people who care very deeply about environmental causes who still feel that this is a worthwhile investment, and potentially not necessarily Bitcoin itself, but some of the alternatives projects that are out there might offer, if your risk return trade-off is the concern around how ethical a project is and the potential upside that it has for humanity, there might be projects with a slightly better profile from that perspective, like Seeds, for instance, than Bitcoin.
Thank you. And then one question from Guy James. Do you know of any DAOs which help people to raise funds for their own projects, as in instead of going to government for a grant or bank for a loan?
Sorry, could you say that again?
If you know any DAOs that would help people to raise funds for their own projects.
Oh, I guess it would be project dependent on the, there might be communities. I think like the DAO is basically the organizing structure, right? It's a bit different from the money raising side of things. So I think I would go to somebody, if you want to create a DAO and you want that to be funded, I think I might go to Aragon to create the DAO element of it, but potentially receive the funding. So if it's a regenerative project, then I know Seeds will allow people to submit projects that can then be funded. So, you might have to combine the two to get what you want there.
Just to share, there are actually a couple of DAOs that invest. So, for example, the DAO is a famous one. I think they are the DAO of consensus. So they definitely invest into a lot of projects. So, but obviously, they wouldn't give like a loan. I mean, you can use something like a compound for that, for example. And then there's a question from Simon Nugent. In the intro to this talk on the Regan Slack channel, there was reference to a near-death experience in a taxi. Are you comfortable sharing any more about the experience of Epiphany?
It's the first time I've actually kind of talked about it publicly, and I thought, I wonder if somebody's going to ask the question. The experience of Epiphany. I don't have any general comments about epiphanies, but what I can say is that, I was in an accident in New York. It was quite a scary experience, and there was also a lot of context happening around that. I had had a big fight with a very good friend of mine. I was very disappointed about certain things, and yeah, it was quite a sad time in my life, and also I was very tired for other reasons. So that week I was in New York. I'd had like a dental infection, and I had travel insurance, of course, and basically discovered that the travel insurance paid for like $200 of dental stuff, which if you've ever needed any dental things doing, $200 just does absolutely nothing. So I realized that my insurance coverage I thought was kind of okay. I mean, I have worked in insurance, I'm not a complete dummy when I buy these things. I thought it was fine, but actually it just wasn't terribly useful. And then I discovered that also in New York, you really have to be careful which dentist you go to, because the dentist I went to wanted to do a root canal. And then later when I got back to the UK and had it checked out, like I did not need a root canal. It was just basically a way of making money. Like she had decided that I should spend more money and was very happy to perform surgery on me to do that. So there's a kind of element of moral corruption that I was aware of. And similarly in the accident itself, you know, the police were just unbelievably awful, and the other car that was involved. So I was in the back of the taxi, my taxi drove into another car, and the other car my car was very badly damaged and the other car wasn't. And the people in the other car were very concerned because they thought they might be late for the US Open. And I was really badly hurt. And yeah, it was just all round. I have really I always had kind of faith in institutions that if you had a really serious problem, that they would be there and that people would do the right thing. And on that occasion, there were a lot of people who were seriously trying to take advantage of the fact that I was on the back foot. And yeah, and it just triggered something in me that wasn't the world I wanted to live in. I wanted to do something about that. So I don't know. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. That was a really good answer. And then we have a question from Chris. Do you prefer Cardano versus Ethereum as it has lower gas fees and more green?
I don't have a preference.
Good. Then there's a very long question from Pete. Pete, do you mind to unmute yourself and just ask the question yourself? I think that will be easier.
Yeah, sure. Apologies for such a long question. So organizations are often now increasing their crypto holdings either in pure or ETF form, depending on how risky they want to do it. How do you see the reporting of these organizations changing in order to let their investors know the sustainability impact of their investment in comparison to their central finance investments? So there's loads of TCFD and SECR disclosures, especially in the UK. And do you think them taking these on will actually lead to further funding because they have to support those investments to their investors, and it will spread less FUD and give actually trusted research into crypto, which will actually, one, help support sustainability reporting and bring more people into the crypto space?
What, Pete, what's the link for you between TCFD is a transparency initiative, right? For those who are not there. So it's about reporting on your carbon emissions. Basically, the thrust behind TCFD is to enable organizations themselves to understand the climate risk that they hold within their organization and to run scenarios and understand what that might mean in the future. And secondly, to also report that externally so that, say, an investor could make a decision about whether to put money into the project or not, or into the company or not. So if an organization holds Bitcoin, then then there's a carbon cost associated with that asset, which might be equivalent to holding a mine or an infrastructure asset. Like takes a lot of energy to create that, right? So how would you see the link between the evolution of TCFD and sustainability for organizations?
I suppose, well, there's the whole topic of the argument of how much energy being used to mine Bitcoin is renewable, and like numbers like 65% or much lower or much higher. So I suppose there's a lot of scary theory sort of stuff in the news that those figures are not as good as we think. And I think by big companies actually investing in it, there'll be more investment in proving those figures, which will actually help the adoption and people being less scared to invest because of the climate cost. So whilst trying to get to that 1.5% as we want to, People are scared to invest in Bitcoin because they see that maybe we'll go further up by doing this. But if there's more funding by massive organizations with central finance, then maybe there's a better chance that people will actually see some truth and be less scared by the fact if these big companies they know and trust are going to be producing reports on it.
Okay.
In order to support their figures they're reporting and their sustainability reports.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, I think that's the direction of travel in general. Like, you know, there's a lot of pressure for Bitcoin to move towards, or in general for us to move towards much greener forms of energy. And, you know, in general, the energy that's going to be used for this is the cheapest energy. So it will tend to be energy that doesn't have a utility elsewhere. So CET, the company that I talked about earlier, that's kind of their thesis, is they can access all these little bits of energy that would otherwise go unutilized, and they can use that for mining. So, you know, so in a way, so I think we will move towards more sustainability, and there just will be more transparency. So I agree with you. Yes, I think that's right. I don't know how much of a break on organizations the sustainability angle of Bitcoin is. I think it's kind of very much in the press and everything, but I think a lot of the ways that financial decision making is taken, for the most part, sustainability isn't a very core part of that decision making. It's kind of a little bit of an add-on, and that's obviously changing. But yeah, hopefully the market will mature. You know, regulation is obviously going to be a big part of that, and then kind of other transparency initiatives will push Bitcoin and, you know, the whole industry really towards a much greener way of operating, which should be really positive.
Cool. Thank you. It wasn't a yes no question. It was a good talking point. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you, Brigitte.
I'm very keen for people to answer one another's questions, by the way, the kind of, you know, spirit of innovative communities and ecosystems. I certainly don't have all the answers.
Yeah, we don't currently have more questions in the chat, but I do have one more question. I'm also someone who came from a traditional finance background and then found himself in crypto. And I still get a lot of my former tradfi friends who think that it's basically all like a big scam. What was your experience changing from traditional finance to crypto, and like what have you like what was the like perception in your like groups of friends and colleagues?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of people are not that well informed, right? So I often find myself before talking about crypto being quite careful about, you know, there's a moment where I think, do I really want to mention this word? Because it can go several different ways. So I don't always talk about it, but right now I'm being much more open about that, predominantly because I see so many really exciting applications, and I think it's important to talk about those and bring people in from the kind of mainstream world who might be able to help these things accelerate.
Thank you. Someone else just shared also, same here, from banks and hedge funds into working in a DAO now.
That's great.
Unfortunately, we only know it's someone using an iPhone because there's no name connected here.
I would love to know more about that experience. I think it's really cool to share.
Feel free. I'm going to ask Mr. or Mrs. iPhone to unmute and tell us, but...
Hello?
Hi there.
Yeah, so I'm actually started working with banks, and then I moved to like hedge funds and asset management. So I think I sent an invite to Brigitte on LinkedIn.
Oh, cool.
Yes, I did an MBA, and then afterwards there's like the COVID thing, and then everything worked remotely. So I hop on to one of the DAO. We're currently doing like a Euro stable coin. So yeah, that's pretty exciting. There's lots of things to learn, and the culture also very different as well. I quite like the kind of the change of the background. So people there are not, I don't know, like it depends on different DAOs, but the one that I work with, we are a bit more remote because we're people like different part of the world, and there's quite some of them in Europe, but we are a lot less like, when I compare to say where we're hedge funds or banks, we are a lot less like corporates. a lot more mature. We feel a lot more equal in how people like look at each other, work with each other. That's it. I think that's what I will classify the cultural difference on that.
Thank you. And then we have a question from Guy James. Guy, do you want to unmute yourself and just ask? Guy?
Guy's asking about whether I'm working within a DAO. Oh,
yeah, exactly.
Right. I'm not currently working within a DAO. I'm having a couple of conversations with organizations who would like to become DAOs, but not currently. I would love to.
Mm-hmm. Do you have recommendations to people how actually, if you want to work for a DAO, what would you do? How would you start getting into it even?
Well, I think that's one for the community. I mean, I guess you can, I know that Aragon, for instance, are hiring. I was on their website today and they were looking for people. So, and our colleague iPhone, who was just talking, has gone into them. Like, they're definitely are roles. I guess if you have a technical profile, that's probably the most helpful, or a kind of design background. They're going to be most of the roles that are available.
Yeah, generally, most of my advice would be like on Discord. It's like each DAO, you will find them on Discord, and usually you can just start getting involved, and like they're always hiring. So that's a good option. Actually, there was, to someone who was earlier asking about funding, there's also something that is very popular, which is Uniswap grants. Let me see if I can find the link. And why I just remembered is because basically the Uniswap DAO votes on who gets the grants, and like a lot of people are getting funded through it. So definitely check that out if you're looking for funding from a DAO. Cool. Do we have any more questions? I'm aware of the time, so I think unless we have more questions, we might slowly call it a night. Larry, Caitlin, any comments, questions, thoughts?
No, not from me.
No, not from me.
Someone just said, May, missed the part about funding. No, what I just said was that Uniswap, the big decentralized exchange on Ethereum, they have something called Uni grants where people can apply for funding for projects, and then the Uniswap DAO votes on it. Because earlier there was a question about getting funding from DAOs.
Do we know the level of funding that they look at, Oleg?
Anything. I know people who got 50K. I know people who got 10 million. Like they have a lot of. They're sitting on a $3 billion treasury, so there's a lot of money to put in.
Cool.
Well, thank you, Brigitte, and. Yeah, I can see that Devin has popped the Telegram link in the chat. If you want to join us on Telegram, carry on the conversation. Also, we post obviously upcoming events and also videos of the recording of the events in case you've missed anything.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brigitte. Greatly appreciated and really enjoyed that. Thank you.
My pleasure. See you again.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in October.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again.